The massive spring offensive that Vladimir Putin once sketched so confidently on his maps has now ground to a complete halt, stuck deep in the muddy quagmire of the Ukrainian battlefield. This vital strategic corridor stretching from Kursk and Belgorod down toward Luhansk was supposed to serve as the vital artery keeping the Russian military machine alive and well supplied. Yet today, it has transformed into something far more sinister, the deadliest drone killing zone anywhere on the planet. Ukraine has constructed an incredibly sophisticated aerial defense web that can detect and neutralize almost instantly any Russian convoy armored column or group of soldiers attempting to push across the border. Picture this for a moment. Imagine trying to advance into a nation capable of churning out around 3 million first-person view drones annually with strike capability reaching 20 kilometers or more into contested territory. Every single second you spend exposed under that open sky becomes your worst enemy, working relentlessly against any movement. As the Kremlin's grand vision of feeding the war effort directly from its own secure borders crumbles apart, this profound geostrategic reversal is rippling outward and destabilizing operations across every sector of the front. Ordinary Russian troops now pause and hesitate before daring to take even one more step forward on Ukrainian soil. The upper Donetsk corridor stands out as the area where this growing sense of dread feels most palpable right now. What was once envisioned as a launchpad for rapid Russian advances has instead morphed into a heavily infested drone base where Ukrainian operators hunt with precision. Military analysts, however, draw attention to an even more critical sector where not even the most battle-hardened elite Russian units want to venture. This is the so-called fortress belt, a formidable defensive line running roughly north to south, parallel to the H-20 highway. In recent days, this zone has delivered one of the most punishing setbacks in Russia's contemporary military record. Those bold operational arrows Putin casually drew across maps of the fortress belt have been utterly erased by harsh battlefield realities. Russian battalions concentrating their efforts toward Pokrovsk find themselves unable to register any meaningful forward momentum. Units attempting risky crossings over the Oskil River near Kupiansk tend to disperse and lose cohesion long before they can establish solid footholds. Reinforcements fail to arrive on time while surrender remains off the table, leaving trapped forces clinging to faint hopes of rescue that never materialize. Lately, even small Russian infiltration teams operating along the Vuhledar axis struggle to extract themselves from the villages they briefly occupy. Remarkably, a military blogger with close ties to the Kremlin has publicly conceded that conditions in western Zaporizhia keep worsening, and that official boasts about capturing villages ring completely hollow. Put simply, the supply bridges and logistical lifelines feeding into the fortress belt from both northern and southern approaches are buckling and failing sequentially. It sounds almost unbelievable, yet the evidence on the ground confirms this grim picture without doubt. Instead of delivering the swift, triumphant breakthrough the Kremlin anticipated, the arrival of spring has saddled the Russian army with an overwhelming tangle of logistical failures and operational headaches. We have seen echoes of this before in history when Finnish forces delivered a shocking blow to the Soviet army amid the harsh winter campaigns of the 1940s. Now, displaying that same fierce resolve, Ukraine is skillfully luring the Russian war machine into the very trap it originally prepared for its opponent. Even respected global think tanks, such as the Institute for the Study of War, now openly document these developments in their regular assessments. Their analysis, released around April 6th, describes how Putin's broader objectives inside Ukraine have slid into a state of deepening and perhaps irreversible deadlock. Consider this possibility: the fortress belt might ultimately give way entirely without a single conventional bullet ever being exchanged in its final defense. Here lies what could rank as Putin's second major miscalculation, a factor with the potential to reshape the entire conflict's trajectory. Russian citizens, whom the Kremlin counts on to volunteer for contract service, increasingly refuse to set foot anywhere near the front lines. Ordinary people have grown unwilling to sacrifice their lives in pursuit of a strategy that offers them no real purpose or gain. In essence, the setbacks visible on the battlefield represent far more than a mere tactical snag for Moscow's planners. They mark the clear onset of a deeper psychological breakdown spreading through Russian society itself. Huge numbers of casualties, thousands of families left without fathers or sons, and the constant shifting of battlefield tactics have eroded public faith in the war's justification at its very core. Recruitment offices that once buzzed with activity now stand noticeably quieter. The once well-oiled propaganda apparatus has slowed to a near standstill. Citizens openly decline to trade their futures for a front line that has lost any clear strategic value in their eyes. The Russian Defense Ministry set an ambitious target of signing up 49,000 new contract soldiers throughout 2026. That figure represented a make-or-break benchmark needed to keep the war effort sustainable. Planners calculated that recruiters would need roughly 1,100 fresh signatures each day, yet the actual results have proven disastrous. Across the first 3 months, the daily average hovered around just 940. This equates to roughly 16% short of the required pace. Should the trend hold, Russia could confront a deficit of at least 65,000 troops by year's end. Even these raw numbers fail to capture the full severity of the crisis. During that same period, the Russian army absorbed close to 89,000 casualties, leaving the Kremlin unable to offset its mounting losses effectively. Major Robert Brody, who leads Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, has spelled out this imbalance with striking clarity. He pointed out that beginning in December 2025 and continuing for 4 straight months, Russian losses have consistently outpaced new recruitment. The inevitable result is an army that has ceased expanding and has instead begun a slow but steady contraction. Both statements from Ukraine's Armed Forces Commander-in-Chief, Alexander Syrskyi, and statistics gathered by the I Want to Live project lend strong support to this assessment of decline. Project data further reveals that approximately 24% of those who do sign contracts face ongoing criminal probes, while 40% carry significant personal debts. The ripple effects of these military strains have hit hardest in Russia's largest urban centers. In major hubs such as Moscow and St. Petersburg, recruitment figures have fallen by about 25% year over year. At least 12 federal regions have responded by boosting signing bonuses anywhere from 50 to 80% since mid-February. The science minister, Valery Falkov, has even issued directives to leading universities suggesting that at least 2% of students should be steered toward defense contracts. In Ryazan, the regional governor instructed businesses, both medium and large, to identify potential recruits from within their own workforces. Despite these escalating incentives and coercive measures, the actual number of volunteers keeps dropping. Only one conclusion fits the pattern. The Russian public has simply lost its appetite for continuing this conflict. What then stands as the primary catalyst, pushing so many away from supporting the war effort? Experts in military affairs highlight the intense drone rivalry unfolding along Ukrainian front lines as the central driver behind this growing psychological fracture. Soldiers can now visualize with frightening accuracy the fate that likely awaits them, because a single drone appearing without warning can bring an abrupt end to everything. Kiev delivered its most potent psychological strike in this domain, recently sending an unmistakable warning to Russian forces. For the first time in the entire conflict, Ukraine has overtaken Russia in the effective deployment of unmanned aerial systems. Fresh figures highlighted by ABC News indicate that during March alone, Ukrainian drones penetrated Russian territory in significantly higher numbers than Russian drones reached Ukraine. Moscow's claim of intercepting 7,347 Ukrainian drones inadvertently underscores the intense pressure its own airspace now faces. Ukraine, in turn, reported neutralizing 6,462 incoming drones, along with 138 missiles. While both sides tend to inflate their reported successes, the overall direction of the trend remains unmistakable and compelling. Superiority in long-range strike capability has shifted decisively toward Ukraine. This edge goes well beyond mere numbers. It signals a fundamental transformation in how modern warfare is conducted. Ukrainian drone teams now exert constant pressure on high-value targets located deep within Russia, well behind traditional front lines. During the night spanning April 5th and 6th, Ukrainian operators struck the Sheskharis oil terminal, close to the port of Novorossiysk in the Krasnodar region, igniting a large blaze. That same evening, drones also hit the Admiral Makarov frigate docked in the port area. A Western security source informed the Financial Times that recent Ukrainian strikes on the Primorsk oil facility resulted in roughly $200 million worth of destroyed oil reserves. By targeting the oil income that funds much of Russia's war, spending these operations strike directly at the financial resources supporting troops in the field. Yet the most serious operational challenges for the Russian military may still lie ahead. In what could prove a landmark development in military innovation, Ukraine has established a broad drone dominance corridor extending 150 kilometers behind Russian positions. Only weeks earlier, this controlled zone reached just 50 kilometers from the front. The effective range has therefore tripled in a remarkably short time. Russian commanders once believed they could navigate the earlier, narrower risk area by traveling under cover of darkness, selecting safer routes, and accepting limited losses. At 150 kilometers, however, that entire approach has collapsed. No safe corridor remains to exploit. Virtually every supply convoy, ammunition transport, and reinforcement column headed for the front now falls squarely inside Ukrainian drone reach. Katerina Stepanenko, an analyst with the Institute for the Study of War, neatly encapsulated the intent behind this approach. The strategy aims to compel Russian soldiers to cover extended distances on foot to reach their assigned positions, thereby gradually undermining their capacity to maintain defensive lines. It offers a method for defeating an opposing force without needing to engage its personnel in direct combat. By rendering the supply arteries feeding the front extremely hazardous, the entire logistical structure begins to buckle under its own unsustainable burden. A deliberate and coordinated campaign underpins this steady expansion of reach. Ukraine's specialized Deep Strike Command has methodically dismantled layers of Russian countermeasures. It first targeted electronic warfare detachments and air defense radar sites using powerful bomber drones known as Nemesis. Once those protective systems fell, small, agile FPV drones gained the freedom to operate at greater distances and with improved survivability. At that point, the defensive structure truly began to crumble. Dmytro Lukashenko, an analyst attached to Ukraine's 413th Unmanned Systems Regiment, described the situation in stark terms. He noted that in certain sectors, Russian troops have resorted to mounting machine guns, salvaged from outdated Soviet-era attack helicopters, onto ordinary trucks as makeshift anti-drone weapons. It resembles fighting a contemporary conflict with relics from a bygone era. Russia continues to lose sophisticated air defense assets and radar equipment at an alarming rate, with no realistic prospect of rapid replacement. While Ukraine refines its techniques week after week, Russia's defensive posture grows steadily more fragile. The crisis has grown so acute that even prominent Z-channel bloggers, once among the war's most enthusiastic backers, have begun voicing open dissent. These influencers, who long served as reliable conduits for Kremlin messaging, now criticize the conduct of Putin's campaign without reservation. Ilya Romasenko ranked for years as one of the most steadfast pro-Kremlin voices in that community. On March 17, 2026, he released a pointed manifesto titled 5 Reasons Why I Stopped Supporting Putin. In it, he leveled direct charges of mismanagement against the leadership and cataloged a series of official deceptions. This moment represented one of the most significant fractures yet observed within pro-war online circles. These individuals once functioned as essential gears in the propaganda apparatus. Now those same gears have reversed direction. Millions of Russians now draw their understanding of the war from these independent channels rather than from official state outlets. When even dedicated supporters describe conditions as catastrophic, ordinary citizens listen closely, and those who listen attentively tend not to volunteer for contracts. Criticism extends beyond bloggers to include senior figures, offering candid assessments of the unfolding difficulties. Former CIA Director David Petraeus addressed Ukraine's evolving capabilities during a recent CBS interview. He observed that despite Russia's substantial advantages in manpower, equipment, and overall economic scale, it remains noteworthy how effectively Ukrainian forces have contained the offensive. Petraeus added that over the past 2 months, Ukraine has achieved more tangible results than its adversary. So what explains these surprising outcomes? Does the drone campaign alone account for the unexpected edge? In reality, Ukraine has done more than simply manufacture large quantities of drones. It has fused drone technology with advanced intelligence-gathering command networks and instantaneous battlefield information into one seamless integrated system. The Delta platform rapidly gathers incoming data and pushes it out to every relevant military unit in real time. Reports suggest this ecosystem helps identify and mark over 2,000 Russian targets each day. Russia, by contrast, appears to lack any comparable unified framework. Its forces often operate as semi-isolated units, with limited information sharing across different commands. This organizational gap exerts a far greater influence than raw numerical superiority ever could. The situation on the Russian side, however, paints a far more somber scene. The Kremlin struggles to safeguard even its highest-ranking generals when they fly over areas it supposedly controls. On March 31st, an An-26 transport aircraft went down over Crimea, resulting in the deaths of 29 personnel, including Major General Alexander Otroshchenko. Official Russian statements attributed the incident to a technical issue. Yet speculation continues to mount that strained air defense crews operating under relentless Ukrainian drone pressure may have mistakenly engaged their own aircraft. With Otroshchenko marking the 15th Russian general lost since the conflict began, such tragedies suggest more than isolated misfortune. They may point instead to systemic weaknesses in leadership coordination and basic operational security. For the average Russian infantryman, serving on the front lines, news of these losses delivers a crushing blow to morale. If senior generals cannot find safety, how can ordinary soldiers expect any better? These repeated incidents also highlight how Russia's operational freedom in the Black Sea continues to shrink week by week. Amid this broader pattern of setbacks, the Kremlin's spending priorities have begun to look like colossal misallocations of resources. Between 2024 and 2026 federal budgets directed roughly $11.8 billion toward infrastructure and administration in the occupied territories of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. That sum equals 3 times the amount spent on roughly 20 ordinary Russian regions. For a country already watching its oil income erode under precise Ukrainian strikes, this enormous expenditure in contested lands effectively diverts funds away from the very soldiers fighting without adequate supplies or protection. More than 600,000 Russian troops, currently estimated to be deployed in active combat roles, could soon encounter severe supply shortages. Delivery of weapons and spare parts may falter. Armored vehicles could sit idle for lack of maintenance, and high-value equipment will likely fall prey to Ukrainian drones one after another. By now, the overall situation comes into sharp focus. While spring sunshine brings warmth to Ukrainian fields for the Kremlin, this season has delivered nothing but an expanding strategic snare of its own making. Russian forces have grown almost immobile inside the very trenches they dug when they launched this war. Ordering a full-scale general mobilization remains the step Putin dreads most of all. He understands that the domestic backlash could quickly spiral beyond his ability to contain. Yet without mobilization, the mathematics of replacing current casualty levels simply do not add up. Russia now stands trapped at the center of a painful strategic bind, and that bind tightens with each passing day. Attention in the coming weeks will likely concentrate heavily on developments along the Donetsk-Zaporizhia axis. Outcomes there may well decide the direction, not merely of one sector, but of the wider conflict. While pressure remains intense on these key battle lines, the consequences of the current difficulties extend well beyond Moscow's immediate surroundings. The most intense activity behind the front lines is taking place inside Russia's aging defense production plants. Giant Soviet-era factories such as Uralvagonzavod have pushed their manufacturing and refurbishment lines to the absolute breaking point. The challenge has moved past simply assembling new tanks or vehicles from raw materials. Stocks of old Soviet equipment stored for decades in open-air depots across Siberia are rapidly running dry. After relying on superficial upgrades of these relic vehicles throughout 2024 and 2025, Russia now confronts a severe bottleneck in 2026 when it comes to sourcing essential parts, including gun barrels, advanced optics, and power plant components. Confronted with Ukraine's nimble high-technology drone networks linked through the Delta system, Russia's outdated reliance on mass production increasingly lags behind and actively hastens the erosion of its own forces. Beyond external drone strikes, Russia's internal supply routes also suffer from a rising tide of domestic sabotage that grows bolder and more organized. Mysterious disruptions to rail signals, unexplained derailments, and sudden fires at key transformer stations along vast military logistics corridors, from the Trans-Siberian Railway down to Rostov, reveal how anti-war groups or local activists have gained confidence. The widespread reluctance to join the army has begun evolving into more active opposition, targeting critical state infrastructure. When all these elements are viewed together, one reality stands out clearly. It is not only foot soldiers or tank brigades that have become bogged down in the Donetsk steppes. Vladimir Putin's larger vision of industrial power and global strategy has lost much of its former effectiveness. Time, which once seemed like Moscow's most reliable partner at the outset of the invasion, has now become a merciless countdown clock ticking steadily against Russian interests. What are your thoughts on all of this? Has the confident prediction Putin made in the early days that Kiev would fall within mere days now flipped entirely on its head? Do you believe Ukraine possesses the staying power to reclaim substantial portions of occupied territory during this prolonged war of attrition as spring unfolds? I look forward to reading your comments below. Thank you for choosing us.